So I've had the pleasure of shooting with the OM-3 for several months now, and it's literally been everywhere with me since it arrived. I've documented my kids' every move to the point that they're pretty bloody annoyed at the sight of the thing, and I've used it as one of my two main cameras for an intense 11-day commercial adventure shoot. More on that soon. But like all my reviews, this one combines real-world use cases and examples along with my insights into the camera's creative features, the ergonomics, video capabilities, and overall experience. So before we begin though, I'd like to thank everyone for stopping by, and I appreciate all of you patiently waiting for the next OM system related video. I know there are few and far between, so I'm grateful for each and every one of you. I really am. And if you aren't following along yet, my name is Matt. I'm a commercial, outdoors and adventure photographer and filmmaker. And as I mentioned before, I am an OM system ambassador. I create videos on my experiences with OM system equipment and provide real-world examples of what's possible with these little powerhouses. So if that sounds like something you are interested in, then please hit that subscribe button and maybe even a like, and we can continue this journey together. All right, so before we start, a full disclaimer. I am an official OM system ambassador, and this review was created as part of that partnership. However, OM system has only reviewed the script to fact check features, names, and operations, and it's not influenced my opinions in any way. I'm pretty proud to represent the brand because I genuinely love and believe in their products. That being said, it's kind of impossible for me not to be a little bit biased, as I am an ambassador after all. So while OM System continues to produce products that enable my creative freedom, I'll continue to be proud of being an ambassador. I've included a mixture of images from my time with the camera that is straight out of camera, using some of the film-like profiles I created along with edits I did to the raw files. But when this review was created, Lightroom didn't yet support the ORF files, so I brought them into Workspace and then I converted them to 16-bit TIFFs and then back into Lightroom. So this is a bit of a unique product for me to review. As you'll see, its placement in the OM system line borders into a variety of different use cases that in my line of work and creative passion is super handy. Still, as there's always a couple of caveats that limit its suitability as a dedicated commercial adventure camera. But I'll tell you why I think this is something that really doesn't matter. I'll also not be doing an unboxing or going over the full list of the camera specs, because you can easily find that on the OM system website. Just have a check in the description below. You'd have to be living under a rock to have missed the massive resurgence of film aesthetics hitting social media. It really is on trend to shoot film and almost dirty up the images coming from our near perfect high-end digital cameras, just so they look unique and organic. Hell, I'm as guilty as charged as this because I feel I've always had a soft spot for the look of movies shot on film and the historical press photos that were all shot on film. They have this like richness and beauty about them. I don't know what it is, but then there are the cameras which historically look pretty damn rad as well, like this one here. They came in all shapes and sizes, with the majority of these sporting an all-metal body, full manual dials, and a sleekness to die for. So that's the OM-2 there. Olympus was one of those pioneering companies that took the world by storm with the introduction of the OM-1 in 1972, the OM-2 in 1975, and the OM-3 back in 1983, running until 1986. So with today's modern camera technology being pretty bloody astounding, companies are looking to combine the tech with vintage class and character, adding a touch of nostalgia to photography without the overpriced costs of buying and developing film. Now, OM System, formerly Olympus, is no stranger to producing vintage style digital cameras, along with the hugely popular and almost cult classic Pen F, which I don't have here, released back in 2016. And over the past few years, there's been an increasingly large amount of online noise about that camera and whether there'll be a successor. Could the OM-3 be it? Who knows? Keep watching and we'll make that decision for yourself. So one of the standout aspects of the OM-3 is its robust metal construction. This is a fantastic upgrade from the plastic bodies of some of the recent models and a welcome throwback to the durable feel of classic film cameras. That being said, there are still some plastic components to the body here and there, like the switches, but the main body itself is metal. And so for those worried about durability, I really don't think having a plastic on the camera is a negative. Like, I've never broken any plastic components on any of the cameras I've used, and I've abused them all. Besides, the original film cameras, they had plastic wrapped around the body anyway, so this mimics the look nicely. And at a glance, it looks very similar to the OM-5, only larger, with different dials and buttons, layouts, and yeah, I generally love the look of the OM-5 despite its plastic body. It aesthetically looked really cool. And the OM-3 takes it up another notch, I think, and I prefer its minimal looks over the Pen F, but looks are super subjective, like the clean lines, the uncluttered dials, system ooze minimalism. Like, it's right up my alley, and it looks equally as good in your hand as on the bookshelf. But internals aside, there really aren't that many similarities between the OM-1 Mark II and the OM-3. Like, they really are strikingly different in appearance in every way. And I think that's one of the key selling points of the camera. It just looks so bloody cool. Like, the designers strive to stay true to the design of the original body, which is definitely a welcome thing. For the weight comparisons, the OM-3 strikes a good balance between durability and portability, I think. At less than 500 grams, it's slightly heavier than the OM-5 at 414 grams, but the OM Mark II is 511, so the original OM-3 was 540 grams, so it's much of a muchness, and a few grams here and there won't make a difference to anyone, I don't think. What will make a difference though is the weight distribution of the overall camera and the balance paired with heavier lenses and longer lenses, which we'll touch on later in the review. But overall, I love the camera's weight. It feels super solid and dense, and it just gives me a lot of confidence. So you can consider the OM-3 a stripped back version of the OM-1 Mark II. There are a few buttons and dials and joysticks that aren't on this camera. And so for ultimate speed, you'll probably need to map the single function button here to ISO, well, that's what I did, and kind of retrain your brain to access a super control panel or custom menu to look for the additional settings. But more on mapping a bit later. So OM system has included a dedicated computational photography button on the back of the camera, where the exposure lock button sits on the OM-1 Mark II. Now, this button is something I found intriguing at first but it makes perfect sense now, because on the OM-1 Mark II, I used to have to map the Live ND and Grad ND to the front two buttons, but these are not available on this camera. So now having all of the computational photography features in one button, near my thumb where I don't have to take my eyes off it, it just saves mapping multiple buttons. So it's pretty cool. And just below that button, there is an autofocus on button. Now, I'll go through that more in the ergonomics section, but yeah, it's great to have that little button there. So the OM-3 also does away with the joystick, so you'll need to revert to the crosspad to choose focus points or use the LCD to touch focus. Bit tricky at first, but doable. And while most users will use the OM-3 as a stills first camera, its video features are definitely worth mentioning, particularly the inclusion of the new S&Q, which is slow and quick mode. The inclusion of a simplified and dedicated still and video dial makes switching between the three most used modes super fast. It's very tactile and intuitive. It's particularly good for hybrid shooters, I think, who are constantly switching between stills and video, a bit like what I've been doing lately. But I'll discuss this video performance and usability later in the review. Autofocus. So one of the biggest upgrades users coming from the OM-5 and the Pen F will enjoy is undoubtedly the outstanding autofocus from the OM-1 Mark II. OM system could easily have included a slower autofocus system in the OM-3, but they kept the flagship processor and AF algorithms, so that's pretty damn amazing, and the face and eye tracking capabilities will be invaluable for those photographing people in portraiture or out on the street. And at no stage during the adventure shoot did I ever notice a difference between the two cameras. So I could lock on and fire off burst shots from dusk until dawn, and I absolutely love the green focus squares at the display where the camera is focusing, because they provide peace of mind knowing that the camera is locked on. It's the same with the OM-3 and the OM-1 Mark II, so yeah, well done. It's no secret that these cameras have world-class IBIS. Like, they pioneered the technology in the first place and continue to be leaders, particularly in terms of stabilization in stills. And yes, the other brands might be catching up, but they are always one step behind, I think. And like the OM-3 features 6.5 stops in the body, and SyncIS has 7.5 stops. So it's slightly short of the OM-1 Mark II, which 8.5 stops, but is it a concern of mine? Not really. Is it a backward step? Not really, because I've had excellent success hand-holding long exposures using good technique and practice. So I think for the photographer this camera is aimed at, it should be more than enough, and it just takes some practice. Okay, so a single SD card. So for me, one of the most significant differences between the two cameras is the single SD card slot. Won't be an issue for most non-professional photographers out there. However, for someone who requires dual card backup for paid work, where there is literally no going back to reshoot, then this is something you might seriously need to consider. I've had cards fail on me before, which isn't pretty, so I guess weddings could fall into that target as well. But that being said, the ideal audience for this type of camera most likely doesn't require a dual card setup. For the travel creator who will be using this camera, a single slot I think is more than enough, especially if you invest in a high quality SD card to match the performance of the camera. The EVF. This one was one of the things I didn't notice until I had a friend turn on the camera. The OM-3 uses the exact same EVF size as the OM-5. So what does that mean? Well, for those of you who haven't used both cameras before, it has a smaller EVF than the OM-1 Mark II, smaller field of view. It also has the 2.36 million dots compared to the 5.7 million dots on the Mark II. And while this might seem like a negative, it really isn't. Like, as I mentioned before, I actually didn't realize it was even different, and I was hot swapping between the two bodies throughout the whole shoot. It's only because someone mentioned it. Ergonomics is one of the key points that really wind people up on social media. Whenever a new camera is released, I cannot begin to tell how many people comment on my videos or post on forums about how the grip doesn't suit their hands. They then seek to gain justification on why they aren't getting the camera before they've even held it. Like, please try the camera for yourself before making rash decisions. Like, it's like buying a pair of shoes online without ever trying them on and expecting them to fit perfectly, or purchasing a one-size-fits-all cap and complaining your head is too small. Like, we are all built differently from each other, and no single camera will fit one's hand perfectly. Each and every person will also be using the camera in a slightly different way, with some people favoring the LCD as opposed to using the eyepiece. So some people only use small light lenses and others will use massive zooms. Like, there is always a trade-off. But so how does the camera feel to use? Coming from the OM-1 series of cameras to the OM-3 was a little tricky at first. And that's not because of the strip back buttons, but more because I wasn't used to shooting with a camera that didn't have a grip. A lot of the stuff I shoot is in an awkward position and awkward angles, and with sometimes really long lenses. And like, this is where a deep grip comes in super handy because, excuse the pun, it also allows for single-handed shooting. Instead, on the OM-3, the only thing that you can really push against for the grip is the little rubberized thumb hold here, which is pretty much identical to the OM-5. And it's staying true to the design of the OM-3, where ergonomics were not deemed as necessary as the tech inside. It's just evolution. So is this camera designed for the crazy, dynamic, fast-paced shooting scenarios that I explained just before? Well, I don't think so. Like, that's what the OM-1 series is for. Can the OM-3 do it if you want? Like, you betcha. It really can take, it doesn't take long to become accustomed to the lack of buttons or the different grip. And I found dual wielding both cameras on the adventure shoot relatively easy. It's really all about muscle memory. And so for those of you who might be concerned, well, my only advice is to get out and practice more. And so for the majority of the shoots that I was using with the camera, I used the 17mm 1.2 Pro, 20mm 1.4, 25 1.2, 45 1.2, and the 12mm f2. Now, I always prefer to shoot with my Pro Primes for my lifestyle work whenever people are the subject. I just find them super sharp, speedy, and lightweight. But they also pair perfectly with the OM-3 because they aren't too front heavy and they maintain that really sleek and minimalistic look and feel of the experience, which I really love. But on occasions I did put the 40-150 on, which was also fine to use, but I think anything larger than that could be a bit tiring out of the field without larger grip. That's not to say long lenses are not what this camera is designed for. Still, it's nice to know you can get top tier autofocus speed if you decide to slap on the 150-400, which I did try. So I did find myself gravitating to the little 20mm 1.4 Pro just because of size, its fantastic look, and it matches perfectly with the OM-3. I didn't get a chance to try these new little primes, but I think they're going to sell really well because they just perfectly match this. And with the weather sealing, they're going to be a great little budget adventure lens. Now, I never really had an issue accessing any of the features despite having fewer buttons. The features I regularly use I found were easily accessible via the pre-map buttons on the OM-3. It was really only the lack of joystick that I missed, but it quickly became accustomed to using the crosspad again. One minor annoyance I did find was the autofocus on button. I would have liked it to be a little bit more raised like the OM-1 Mark II. I don't know, I found because the button sits to the left of my thumb grip a fair way, I found myself searching for the button and taking my eye off the subject to see where it was because I kept thinking it was one of the other buttons. The way my particular thumb naturally sits on the grip means it naturally rolls to about 11 o'clock and kind of misses the button. Now I regularly operate the camera like this and I kind of pinch the body of the camera. So on the OM-1 Mark II I could easily do that and find the autofocus on button. But with this camera I find it a little bit more tricky, but I guess this is not the kind of action camera that the OM-1 Mark II is. So I think for 99% of you out there this won't be an issue, and you likely aren't dual wielding both cameras, so you'll just get used to using this. I also decided to map the record button to the handheld high-res 14-bit mode, just like the OM-1 series has, because I find having that dedicated button is just so much faster, and I use it quite a lot for the landscape shots as super handy. But you can still access it from the new computational photography button. All right, the new creative features. I think this is what everyone is really here for, like that cool little creative dial on the front of the camera. Like this little dial has single-handedly ignited a new fire for photography outside of my commercial work. So for users of the Pen F, you will be pretty familiar with the creative dial that sits neatly on the front of the camera. But for those of you who aren't, Olympus, like always, was incredibly forward-thinking and included this little dial that allowed users to customize their own film-like color profiles. So basically both in color and monochrome. I'm not talking about like simply changing white balance and contrast. I mean adjusting individual color vibrancies levels, shadows and highlight levels, grain and vignette. Like at the time, there was not really any other camera manufacturer that was doing this, and it was perhaps a little bit too early in the piece for it to become a global hit. But fast forward now almost 10 years, and the resurgence of the nostalgic looks is back in the spotlight, placing cameras with film-like profiles back into the spotlight. So let's take a deep dive into this creative color dial and how I specifically use it. By the way, any adjustments the creative dial makes to an image will be applied only to the JPEG file, so they will not be applied to the RAW file. You actually can't even select RAW by itself when the creative dial is engaged. So for the entire time I'd been using the camera, I had mine set to superfine JPEG and RAW, then tweaked it in post. There are 4 settings to choose from. You have mono, which just means monochromatic, aka black and white. You have color, which is the one I use the most. You have art, which are the artistic filters found in most of the digital Olympus and OM cameras. And then you have CRT, which stands for color creator. So OM Systems provided a good variety of film-like profiles already, mapped to each of the dial settings, so you can pretty much just start shooting straight out of the box. You can then easily adjust each of them, these profiles, to suit your particular taste, or if you're like me, you go in and create the hell out of custom profiles and try and mimic popular film stocks. Okay, so first up, the mono dial. So beginning with this one, you get a selection of 4 pre-map profiles. all of which are actually really nice looking profile straight out of the box. I think my two favorites are probably the classic film, which has like quite a bit of contrast, which I like, and the classic film low contrast, which makes things look nice and soft. So I'd love to do a shoot purely using these settings one day. So if that interests you, let me know in the comments below and maybe I'll make a video of that. Okay, so within each of those profiles, there are different options for customization. So the first bit is the color filter, and you can choose between 8 different colors of the color spectrum and decide how much of that color is filtered out. And you get 3 customization strength levels within that one. The next one is shadows and highlights. And so here you have the option to modify the shadows, mids and highs of the tone curve, each with 7 levels of adjustment, positive and negative. Think of it like a tone curve. Then you have the shading effect, and this just basically adds or subtracts a vignette. It's pretty super handy to have and very easy to use. And then we have the sharpness, which is pretty self-explanatory, like it increases or decreases the level of sharpness. Something that is vital if you're trying to replicate a film look. Then you have contrast, and this is a global contrast adjustment that most people would be used to using in their post-production workflow. And it just basically increases or decreases the distance between the shadows and the highlights. Yeah, giving you nice contrast. And then the final one is the film grain effect, and this allows you to choose the level of film grain added to the JPEG image. But it's nearly impossible to kind of see it in the preview there. You kind of have to take a photo and then zoom in to see the chosen strength. So I recommend testing this at base ISO so the digital image noise doesn't affect the image and you can kind of see exactly what the grain will look like. And then you have color. So this gives you the option to tint the image with like a normal sepia, blue, purple and green filter. All right, the color dial. This is really where the magic begins, at least for my use case, and one of the ones got me the most excited. So we have 4 unique film-like profiles already mapped to look like the below. And straight out of the gate, these actually look really nice and should be more than enough for most people to get started with. And there's plenty of customization to play around with if you want to adjust things further. Just what specific film stock they're trying to replicate, I'm not entirely sure. But just like the monochrome setting, you have 4 color profiles that can be easily customized. They can all be accessed quickly from the Super Control panel. So first up, we have the color vivid. And here we have a color wheel that has 12 different points, each representing a color of the spectrum. So you can then adjust the vividness of each color +5 or -5. And you can also select all of the colors and globally adjust the vividness. And then we have the shadow and highlights. So just like in the monochrome, we can raise or lower the shadows, mids and highlights. Then we have the shading, add or subtract the vignette again, the contrast, creating global contrast, and then the sharpness to add or reduce the sharpness. So pretty much the same, but we don't have grain in the color one. And next up we have the art filter dial setting. So this has pretty much remained unchanged across a lot of the Olympus and OM cameras with 16 unique filters. These are more for fun, I think, and not really something I ever use, but it's nice to have them at a pinch, and yeah, they're very creative. And then we have the CRT color creator. So this feature allows you to select a particular hue on the color wheel and adjust its vividness. So while this is cool, its application I think is a bit quite limited, at least for my purposes, so I don't kind of use that one. But I'm sure all of you are wondering, how do I use the dial? So here's a little bit how I've been using this new color creative profiles over the past few months. So if you are like me, you really want to create unique looks from within the camera manually by customizing each profile. Now, I spent hours playing around with each profile, trying to replicate my favorite film stocks and looks that I found from other photographers online. My most used 4 color profiles I created were a classic Cuban negative, Portrait 400, Ektar, Kodak Gold 200, and a special profile that looks great on bright outdoor scenes. And I just named that outdoors. Now, ideally, I would have loved to map these profiles to color profiles 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you can definitely do this. However, to make these profiles work properly, you also have to modify the white balance offset of each profile. So that way when shooting auto white balance, it skews towards that particular custom white balance. Now this is all well and good, but at the time of recording this, you can only map the white balance offset tack globally. So that means it will be the same offset for each of the color profiles. So unless you plan on going in and changing the offset every time you switch profiles, you really can't use all the custom profiles individually. So my workaround for this was to map each of the profiles I wanted and then save these as a custom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the main dial. I could then rename each of the C buttons to be a film stock look that I wanted. So when rotating the dial, it comes up with that name, which is pretty cool. But I just wish it also displayed this on workspace so I could tell which profile it was shot in. It's quite fast to switch between the custom dials, I really like it. So if you can have that white balance offset for each profile, then you could theoretically have like 20 unique profiles, 4 on each of the C buttons. Like I'd probably create like 4 Kodak profiles on C1, some black and white on C5, and other various profiles on the others in between. And I won't go into too much detail about how I did all this because I plan on doing a separate video on my best settings and creating custom profiles. So if this is something you're keen to see, drop me a comment below and yeah, I might even put some of the profiles up. Okay, improvements. So there are some things I would really love to see implemented in future firmware updates, and I've passed this on to the powers that be, so hopefully we see them implemented in the next iteration of firmware. So first up, like I said, I'd love to be able to map white balance offset for each individual color profile, because it means we can then select each profile to shoot with the white balance be mapped already to that specific profile and not globally across all profiles, if that makes sense. Then love the ability to rename each color profile rather than just color 1 through to 4, so I actually know what profile I've created. In addition to the vividness wheel, it'd be great to have the ability to modify luminance and hue, and this can be done within workspace, and I think would seriously open up an infinite amount of film-like color profiles. It's like you could literally skew any color you want towards another one. If we can do that within workspace on a color calibrated monitor, then put them back onto the camera, it'd just be mind-blowing how much customization it can have. I'd love to have the ability to add grain to the color profiles, not just in monochrome, and add at least 2 additional points on the highlight and shadow curve, like 1 for the black and 1 for the highlights. And that way we could lift the blacks and crush the shadow, crush the highlights, creating like a really nice faded film look. As mentioned before, I'd love to see the option to see which color profile was used within workspace, or at least which custom dial mode it was shot in, because I've named each of them accordingly, like Kodak 200, it'd be great to know which one I shot with. So nothing has really changed between the OM-3 and the OM-1 Mark I in relation to video specs, but because we get the same codecs and resolution options, so I won't even touch on those. But what we do get though is the inclusion of the dedicated dial and the S&Q mode. And for those of you who aren't quite sure what S&Q modes are, it effectively plays back the recorded video in slow motion or fast motion, depending on what you set it to. So that means for regular non-slow motion shots, I set the camera to regular video mode and have my base or playback frame rate at 25p because we're in Australia, or 24p if you're in the States. And then I press record. And then I can also toggle 50p recording within this regular mode still, and the camera will record double a frame rate, so then I can slot it down in post. However, with the S&Q mode, the slow motion component is already done within the camera. So I can view the video in slow motion in camera, which is pretty cool, at the chosen playback of my project. So the OM-3 introduces 2 new cinema modes, the OM Cinema 1 and 2. Tailored for those creators, I think, who want a beautiful film-like footage straight out of the camera. These modes are perfect for avoiding extensive post-processing and color grading, delivering really good results, I think, with minimal effort. I didn't have a good play with these modes, but from what I saw and just playing around with family, I think I still prefer to shoot in complete log and have full control over the image, but that's just me in my workflow. One thing to note is that both modes record only in 8-bit. So it's a significant limitation for me. While they're great for quick turnaround projects, I think the lack of 10-bit recording doesn't quite offer the flexibility I need for advanced color grading or more demanding professional work. Additionally, I'd love the option to adjust some of the baked-in settings within these modes, like the sharpness and the contrast, or add some grain, as that's currently not possible. And these 2 options, particularly Cinema 1, I think could be a really viable workflow tool for content creators looking to deliver fast turnaround results. They're also perfect options, I think, for people looking to begin their journey into video. So One of the most significant barriers I find with beginner videographers is that the post-production color space transform, color grading processes are so complex. I think though mode 1 and 2 give that look already straight out of the camera so the operator can focus on everything else. But if you'd like to learn more about my best video settings, drop a comment below and yeah, I may get one of those created. Have you ever heard of someone who pursues their creative passion and turns it into a business, but at the same time, that business kind of kills some of the creative juices that they had from the start? That's kind of what happened to me, and it was challenging to find a balance. And I clearly remember back to in the day when me and my Instamates would meet up and just go out and shoot and explore for the fun of it. Like, we'd push our creativity and try new things because there was no client dictating what the end product should look like. We had fun and no one judged us. Now with my hectic workload and young family to look after, I haven't been out to shoot just for myself in possibly 5 or more years. But I think that now could change. Like, the OM-3 has all the bells and whistles I could ever want, has the utmost power under the hood, which is damn exciting for someone like me. But the features and spec sheets are one thing. It's kind of challenging to translate and depict how a camera makes one feel when using it. So this whole idea of user experience is incredibly subjective. I understand that. So ultimately, I think it's the most crucial component though of what makes the OM-3 so unique and why I think it'll resonate with so many people out there. And so while writing up this review, I quite a few weeks to think about how I could best describe the feeling I get when shooting with the camera. And I kind of liken it to the reintroduction of the cult classic Suzuki Jimny. It was a small, go anywhere, tough as nails little 4-drive that I so desperately wanted for many years. I'd read countless reviews from all sorts of major car critics, and the overwhelming consensus was that it was small and compact enough to be a great city driver, yet you could literally push it through the harshest environments and beat out cars 3 times the price when put in the off-road tests. Like, there were clear shortcomings though of owning something like this due to its size, but every single one of the reviewers closed out their article saying the same thing. Would I buy one? Abso-bloody-lutely. Why? Because of the feeling you get when driving the thing. It's just something money can't buy. It's just so much fun. Like, it inspires you to get out there and explore. And so I've been waiting for a camera like this for some time now, a vintage looking camera that I can use on my day-to-day shoots, along with shooting portraits and non-commercial projects. So a camera that has like tech inside that can push my creativity while also making me slow down a bit and think about my shots. And while photography shouldn't be a fashion show, I also want a camera that looks good and makes me feel good when using it. So I think the OM-3 ticks those boxes. Now, I talked with 2 of my colleagues last week who both shoot on film and use digital cameras with film simulations inside. They both wholeheartedly agree that having so much control of the camera makes the whole process fun. Like, you can't wait to review the image and see the custom profiles live. They were each very blown away at how OM System replicated the original look of the OM-3. And unless you saw the back of the camera, you could have sworn it was just a film camera. They were also super impressed at the versatility of the camera's interchangeable lens options. I think fixed lenses are cool, but having the option to swap out for a different focal length of an already small lens is a must-have. I mean, you can take 3 of these with you. And I love that the camera doesn't scream professional when you look at it. Like, when you're shooting street photography, I think the last thing you want is for your subject to feel uneasy about a massive DSLR pointed at their face. Combined with that silent shutter, I think this is the perfect travel companion. It was difficult to conceal the camera though, because throughout my time with it, as people really were quite interested and want to ask about it. So very difficult with an NDA. All right, so who is this camera for? Well, at first I was a little conflicted, but now after some months of working day in and day out with it, I'm pretty confident I know the answer. The OM-3 sits within the product line as a camera with the power and tech to do it all while omitting some of the ergonomics and storage redundancies of the OM Mark I. But these things that only professional commercial photographers I think will likely miss. So I think the OM-3 is for the content creators, travelers and creatives who yearn for a filmic look without the hassle of actually using film. And I think these creatives want to push the boundaries by using the latest computational photography while capturing blazing fast portraits of models and life on the streets. Like these creatives strive for that special feeling you get when holding a piece of art in your hands. Like the OM-3 is the camera for people who might be stuck in a rut and want to break out and explore new looks and angles without the cost of film. They're there to make a statement, basically. So I think ultimately this camera will become my primary camera for anything that isn't of a major commercial nature. There are definitely things I'd love to see in future firmware updates that can take this camera to an entire new level. And I really urge anyone who might be considering this to head to their local camera store and get it in their hands. Like, never take a person's opinion, even mine, as gospel. Photography is and should be more than just specs. It's a creative art form that with the right tools can create magic. So that's about it, guys. Thank you very much for sticking with me on all of this. I know, again, that was kind of a long review. Again, sorry it's taken me so long to put out new content, and I really hope that this year can be the year that I put out some more. So if that does resonate with you, then please hit that subscribe button, give us a like, drop us a comment on any questions you have about the camera. I'm sure things will evolve over time, and I do plan on creating that video about how I created some of the film like profiles. And for those of you who don't want to create their own, I'm thinking about putting some up for sale as well, so you can add those to your camera when you get it. So on that note, thank you.